that some of his supporters may ultimately support Senator Bernie Sanders in later rounds of the Iowa caucus.
Team Rising is here to dive into what that means. Stephen Cobb, he's former Obama administration appointee, previously served as Deputy Attorney General of Virginia. And Inez Stepman, she's senior policy analyst at the Independent Women's Forum. Two great friends of the show. Good to see you guys.
Thanks for having us
it's
back.
not just Andrew Yang, which is raising some eyebrows here. So Tulsi Gabbard also, I believe we have a photo of this, stopped by a Bernie Sanders canvassing field office while she was in Plymouth, New Hampshire, in order to say hello. Obviously, that's raising a lot of eyebrows. So both Yang and Tulsi Gabbard, both in separate interviews, I think Tulsi said something to the effect of, "I stand with Bernie." People with who are on my side.
She said she thinks the establishment is afraid of both of them.
Her and Bernie. So I think she's giving Stephen pretty clear indication to her voters in Iowa that after the first alignment that they will go to Bernie Sanders. That could put him up by about 5 to 6 more % in terms of the vote, and that actually could put him up overall over Biden and Buttigieg. What do you think?
If there's more than 1% of Tulsi supporters in Iowa, I'd be shocked. But separate from that, I think Andrew Yang's commentary is accurate. It didn't come out as a full-throated support for Bernie, but more of a recognition that the demographics of the people who tend to support him are very similar to the ones that support Bernie. So the biggest subcategory of Yang supporters, at least by the polling that's been done, are young men under 30. Also a demographic with which Bernie Sanders does remarkably well. So I don't think it's necessarily news-breaking that Andrew Yang recognizes that his largest voting bloc is one that's shared with Senator Sanders.
It's not about breaking news. It's more that, look, the guy's got 5% of the vote and that could all go to Bernie. So, this is where we have to focus so much on second choice, because that's ultimately what could decide this entire thing. Like Amy Klobuchar, people all going to Joe Biden.
Sure, and I think that those three candidates, Yang, Tulsi, and Bernie, all have something else in common. They have I see them as presenting very, very different messages, all three of them. But one thing that they all are not is establishment Democrat. And so if the main fault line in the Democratic Party is between people who are looking for something close to what the Clintons used to offer, somewhere between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, then those three candidates are outside of those boundaries in different ways. So, if you're looking to deliver a message to the establishment, and your first choice is Tulsi or Yang, then it makes sense that you would caucus.
You're hitting on basically the core of this show, which is that the real divide in America isn't necessarily left-right. It's like establishment, anti-establishment. And so it makes perfect sense to us that there would be a lot of overlap in these coalitions. And I want to be clear. I think Andrew Yang is going to outperform what the polls are saying in Iowa, because he is an anti-establishment type candidate, drawing in new. We see the energy of his movement on this show every day. But I think in certain caucus, caucus precincts, he will reach that credibility, viability threshold, and be able to, his supporters will be able to support him
and get a delegate. That's important.
But it's for me, it's interesting just to see a sort of verbal acknowledgement of the anti-establishment thread that runs through these three candidates, because as Inez said, they are very, in terms of their focus, like what they do on day one is very different. Their kind of philosophy is very different. Stylistically, they're very different. And yet you can see this anti-establishment thread running through them and running through their coalitions.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I think policy aside, I think it's often a false equivalency to say establishment, anti-establishment. When you talk about whether that's Biden or Bernie, you're talking about people who've each spent decades in Congress together, often voting.
But it doesn't make you establishment.
Often voting for much of the same policy.
So you think a Democratic Party under Bernie Sanders would be just like it is now? You don't think that?
No, but I also don't think a Democratic Party now is the same as the Democratic Party was in the 90s. I don't think that's the same as it was in the 80s. There is some of this that just changes over time. And so some of these are trying to match what's an equivalency now to what was before. I don't think it's accurate.
I think that's wrong, Inez. But I think it's just just because you're a senator doesn't mean that you're part of the establishment.
I think that the majority of the American people are not happy on the left or the right with the way that policy or politics has been conducted for the last 30 to 35 years. Basically, the post-Cold War era. I think to zoom out for a minute, what we're seeing is the close. I think in history books we're going to write there was an era 1945 to 2016. Right? And there were certain presumptions of politics for both the left and the right between 1945 and 2016. And now we're in that bumpy transition period upgrade, and I think both parties, the coalitions that make them up, are going to shift. Right now, I mean, I know that you guys fight hard against this in the show, but right now, it's pretty clear there's an alignment of the working class in America with the Republican Party in a way that hasn't been the case in previous decades, right?
White working class.
Well, not only, although because the electorate overall for Republicans is white, it's mostly white working class voters, but not only. And I wouldn't be surprised actually if you see some of those racial lines fading. And by the way, one of the most interesting things to me about Yang campaigning in Iowa is I was looking through some of the endorsements that they had put up online. It's the coalition of the canceled. Every canceled comedian it's not just Dave Chappelle, it's Norm Macdonald, and they're all there, by the way. Dave Chappelle is playing shows in Iowa, so I think you guys are right. I think that he will overperform.
What do you
absolutely.
What do you think about that dynamic? I mean, it is true. There have been with Chappelle and Andrew Yang and the places that Yang has been willing to make his case that are supposedly, outside the bounds of where Democrats are supposed to go. With Bernie Sanders unapologetically touting his Joe Rogan support, which, caused a whole backlash online. Doesn't seem to hurt him with the voting public, though.
Yeah. Well, no, I think the Bernie supporters are tried and true Bernie supporters. To your point about treading outside where Democrats usually go, I think it's great that we've had so many candidates. I think it's fantastic that they're talking to voters everywhere, whether they are traditional Democratic caucus and primary voters or not. It's great to take that message, talk about success in 2020, and it's my hope that whoever the nominee is, because of the debates that have gone on, because of the wide-reaching campaigns, that will be stronger for it going into November of 2020.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the second choice, I want to emphasize this again, it does also help Biden, which is that Klobuchar has got 9% of the vote. That's not a lot. She's going to hit some in precincts, but a lot of that is going to go to Biden. And so the real question is there going to be enough second choice Sanders support to overcome that? And I'm actually not so sure, right? Because as Warren voters are half split between like Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders.
But I don't know that Klobuchar supporters are 100% Biden
they're probably
either.
half
I think they're Warren, I think they're Pete. So I don't know that it's all monolithic. Yeah. And, these campaigns can make these deals of we're going to try to send our supporters your way, but voters have mind of their own.
I would not be surprised if you see the second choice get really evenly split, that no one's really taking huge chunks. And to your point, even if it's a small percentage from one candidate, but if it goes almost as a block to one voter, that could end up being.
I also think voters are less ideological than the way that we would analyze this, right? 100%. It's not like they're going through every plan and then in an algorithm, okay, this candidate agrees with 80% of the plans of my original choice of the candidate. Personality plays into it. I think that basic distinction between sort of continuation of the Obama era versus something anti-establishment and new. I think that's a fault line that's important. But I don't know that you can calculate who somebody's second choice is based on the percentage agreement between that person's first choice and the next person who agrees with those plans.
Yeah,
I don't think that's how people vote.
Well, the polling I saw, we highlighted this on the show, of Yang supporters, their first choice in terms of second choices was Bernie Sanders. And their second choice was, then we just leave. Tulsi Gabbard.
Walk out of the
Tulsi Gabbard supporters, their number one choice was, well, then we'll just leave. So,
but again, to that same point, second choice might not even matter that much, whether or not they're splitting evenly or just leaving. Unless people are making a big move from one candidate to a second choice, the numbers don't change.
You never know. One of my favorite tweets I saw from this is a campaign reporter talked to a woman. She's like, I voted for Trump in 2016, and now I'm voting for Pete Buttigieg. And everyone was like, wait, what? And she was like, I thought about voting for Bernie and Warren, but now I'm with Pete. And I'm like, that's how people actually vote.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You're not wrong.
Biden voters, second choice is Bernie Sanders. So there you go. All right, guys, stick with us. We got more right after this.